Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bright Talk Lean IT Service Management channel. My name is David Smith. I'm the president of Micromation. Our company specializes in helping organizations increase value through continual improvement. Today, I'd like to share with you some ideas on how to get ready for cloud IT service management and some of the things that you need to know to get in control before it actually ends up controlling your destiny. Some of the questions that you may have pondered or been asked recently is, who is actually running with cloud service management, and where is it going, and what are the changes that you need to be aware of? What's driving it? What are some of the risks imposed by it? And, how do you actually manage it without killing the value that it's bringing, because it is bringing a tremendous resource to businesses today. And where will you get the resources in order to shift your current mode of delivering services to this new wave of delivering services? So in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to cover a little bit about what is cloud computing and, how organizations are rallying around it and adopting it. We'll also talk about the differences between traditional and cloud models, as well as what are the benefits as well as challenges that people are seeking and experiencing as a result of shifting to this new computing platform model. And then what do you need to do to get ready, and why, and what are some options available to you to get up to speed quickly. So as we go through this, if you have any questions, I see that there is a chat box that you can put your questions in there, and I do have a Q&A session that I'll have at the end of the session to answer any questions that you might come up with. So let's get started. So first thing I'd like to talk about is just some stories that you hear very recently about some of the sort of the disasters that have happened, and a lot of them are based around cyber risks. One that comes to mind that was a little while ago, a company called Target out of the United States. They are a retailer, and they had a breach in which there were very confidential information, specifically credit card information that was stolen, and ended up costing the company a lot of money, like in the millions of dollars. This resulted in the resignation of the CEO and the CIO of the company. Now, what you probably don't know or didn't hear so much about what was the underlying source of the risk, it was not that they didn't have good practices in place for managing the security of their environments. It was that there were partners that had, access through digital trusted resources that did not have access, and the partners were compromised, and hackers gained entry into the organization through these trusted digital connections. And that's what, caused the grief that Target had experienced. But it hardly seems like there's a day that goes by where there isn't something big happening to do in this particular area. And some that have happened over the course of the last year. You might have heard about the United States Office of Personnel Management. They had been targeted and breached where, millions of records of, people's confidential information were compromised. Other ones in the news, group called the Impact Team stole user data for an organization called Ashley Madison, and we're trying to reveal information about extramarital affairs and things that people don't want to hear about. And another one where the U.S. hotel chain Hilton revealed that they had credit card information stolen, and this goes on. And there's many of these stories. And not that this whole presentation is about, security only, but that's one of the forefront items right now that is very top of mind. So cloud's here to stay. It's good, it's easy, it's fast, it's cheap. It's being marketed directly to the business users and the executive in the business. And that inspires us to get in charge of this and to be a leader, and for IT to take a role in helping the business, to get the advantages of this service and exploit it, but do it in a controlled manner and lead by example. So this is a great opportunity for IT to help the business take control of this and to control it before, it creates hassles or problems in your organization, and then if you're not in a leading position, then you could be in trouble. So before I get into the presentation, I would like to run a vote or a poll here to see who is on the line and, what is your maturity with cloud adoption? And specifically, I'm looking for you to vote on, does your organization currently have no plans, or would you be considered, number two, like a cloud watcher? You're sort of looking at what's going on and you're sort of planning it. Or are you actually started? You've got your first project underway. Are you like a beginner? Or maybe you're a cloud explorer and you've got many apps running and quite familiar with it. Or possibly you're very intensively cloud focused. It's heavy use. So I'm going to run the vote here, and I'm going to start it. And hopefully you will see the questions on your screen if you would be so kind to tell me a little bit about yourself, and that way I can shape this presentation according to who is on the line. Okay, so I'm just waiting for some votes to come in. I haven't seen any yet, so hopefully, okay, waiting. Still don't see. I'm not seeing any votes coming in. Hopefully you can see it. Oh, here they come. Okay. Okay, they finally came in. I'm going to stop the voting, and I'm going to review the results. And here's what you told me. So 27% of you are cloud watchers, and also 27% are cloud beginners. 33% are cloud explorers running apps, and 13% are heavy use. Okay, so we can see that none of you don't have plans, that this is definitely something that you're interested in and pursuing and moving forward. That's great. Okay, so let's get into this. So what's cloud computing all about? Now I'm going to go through some of these fairly quickly because it seems like you're very familiar with some of these items. But essentially, cloud computing is like the next big wave in computing. And, people discuss about the significant waves where we have the mainframe era, then we have the PC server, client server era, and now cloud computing in the late early 2000 timeframe. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, their definition of cloud is, a model that enables convenient and on-demand network access to shared pool of configurable resources, and things like server, storage, apps, networks can easily and quickly be provisioned and released with minimal management effort on a service provider interaction. So that's sort of the general description of what cloud's all about, and I think you probably all know that. The models that are being used are essentially three, and they aim at different user groups within the organization. So at the lower level, you can see there's infrastructure as a service. That's providing infrastructure-based resources, aimed at primarily administrators in IT. Then there's a layer above that, which is more like a platform as a service, and it is providing the software components and databases and programming tools, and it's targeted more at the developers. And then at the peak, it's to do with software as a service, and this is where it's targeted at providing applications to the actual users and through a service-based approach. And I think this is something that's quite common and people are quite familiar with, but the deployment models that are being used are categorized into four different areas. There's public cloud, whereby third-party providers or hosting organizations provide this shared public resource in which you can use, and your information or your data is actually, it's out there in the public or in the wild. There's also a different variation where there's now cloud private usage, and this is where you've got exclusive access and storage of information either on your own premises at your location on site. So maybe you're building these cloud environments, in your own data center, or it can be outsourced to outsource providers. It's still your private space. It's not shared with anyone else. It's exclusive for you. And big companies like IBM and Microsoft and Amazon offer these kinds of services. And then there's community cloud services, whereby different groups of or organizations share together or band together to have a community-based type cloud environment, which they share the resources across the community, but it is theme-based or based by governments or organizations of that nature. And then the most popular growing space is what is referred to as hybrid, and it's sort of a mixture of both public, private, and community-based cloud, more so with the private and public. And you'll see shortly some slides that talk about the high growth rate that's being experienced in that place, in that space. Now, some characteristics of cloud is, first of all, it's on demand, it's self-service, it's completely automated in so much that you can, through a couple of keystrokes, dial up, what it is that you're looking for, and it's almost near real-time delivery. So within seconds or minutes, voila, you have, a computing service at your fingertips, and all you need to do is register and figure out, how you're going to pay. So it's access through self-serve interfaces and quick and easy, painless to get these services. The second characteristic is that there's broad access to these services. They're using open standards and APIs, which are pretty common to a lot of the technologies using IP, HTTP, and REST-based interfaces and protocols, and that it's available virtually anywhere that there's network internet connections. So it's pretty easy to access. Another characteristic is that they pool resources. So the beauty of this is that as more and more resources are using different infrastructures, they're pooling together, and in doing so, you build economies of scale. So a highly used resource runs much more efficiently, and therefore the cost of using that resource is much lower in terms of sharing. Another characteristic is that it's very elastic, meaning that as demand increases, you can dynamically dial up and get more resources, like instantaneous. Or when you're not using the resource or you have no use for it, you can release this resource, and it automatically scales. And in a lot of cases, there's no manual intervention at all required. So it scales up and down as you need it. So you use just what you need. And then finally, your usage is actually measured. So it's metered. It's like a utility. It's just like, hydro or water usage. You pay for actually what you use. Anything you don't use, you're not paying for it. And so you can cancel the service at any time, and that's the beauty of paying for exactly what you need. So how is this different from the traditional versus the cloud responsibility? Well, traditional computing, as you know, you own it, so all costs involved with purchasing whatever capacity you require, it's yours, and often to make sure that you've got enough capacity, the practice was that people over-procured and they bought more capacity than they actually needed. That was because it took a long time to provision, and it's more difficult to get access to this, and it's not as scalable. Therefore, it required intensive management and a high focus on putting redundancy in place to make sure that the system was highly available, which meant you needed really good skills and expertise to manage these environments, and you had to think about how to, deal with disasters and recover from it as well. So, many organizations who may not have, deep skills in IT had to become IT experts to be able to manage this type of computing platform, and made it somewhat challenging and cumbersome. So the difference between traditional versus cloud is that traditional, you owned everything, whereas in cloud, it's an expense. You just pay for what you need. It's self-provision versus manually provision. Before you had fixed capacity, now it's elastic. You use it as you require it. In the traditional method, you had dedicated hardware. Well, in this case, you have no hardware. It's a service. Previously, you paid for capacity. Now you pay for use. Before you needed system admins to be able to configure access. Well, now it's done all through APIs, application interfaces. And then new systems come with disaster recovery and high availability built into them. And they're highly agile, meaning that you can spin them up and turn them down very quickly. And in most cases, they're green computing. So they're looking at ways to reduce costs and cooling, et cetera, and sharing that up amongst many different resources. So the new model is very attractive in terms of its ability to scale up when you require it. So why are organizations adopting cloud? Well, first thing I want to show you is what the cloud adoption growth rate is. And this is a chart that's provided by Sky High, a network company, who has a report that they produce quarterly that looks at the growth and penetration of cloud services. And these specific services here that we're looking at more to do with software as a service. And you can see that there's tremendous growth here, that large organizations have upwards of over 1,000 titles in their organization that are being used both by the enterprise as well as just the users or consumers within the organization. Now, to get your head around that, you probably might not believe that, but if you actually were to audit or assess your environment, you'd be shocked at how many types of cloud services are in there. And I'll just kind of name some here as examples, like pretty familiar with things like enterprise services like Microsoft Office, Salesforce, Cisco services, Yammer, Zendesk, ServiceNow, Workday, Box, GoToMeeting, ADP, SuccessFactors, SharePoint. I mean, these are ones that we're all very highly familiar with. Well, these are cloud services, and they are within the organization. Other ones that are more consumer-based are things like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Gmail, StumbleUpon, Flickr, Vimeo, Google Drive, Google+, etc. And the list goes on and on. And so when you actually go and audit by connecting services that can actually scan who has what in the organization, you would be surprised at the growth that's in here. You can see the growth curve from the last couple of years. It's constantly going up and doubling and tripling in some cases. So it's highly popular. Now, another significant growth area is hybrid cloud. And we can see here, and this is from another organization called RightScale, who also do provide services for brokering and managing cloud environments. And they have a report called State of the Cloud. And it's in recent report 2016. But they're looking at, of the 95% of the respondents that responded, and that's, I think, 1,000 plus people responded to their survey, 95% of them are using cloud, and 71% of those people have a hybrid-based solution, meaning they're using portions of public as well as private. So they are now getting a little more savvy about which cloud services they use. They build rules around when it makes sense to use public services and when it makes sense to use private. And a lot of that has to do with the governance around data policies, which we'll talk about in a few moments. But this is significant growth in this particular area. So that's the evidence. Why is that happening? Well, you need to kind of look at what the main benefits are that people are getting from cloud computing. And from RightScale's report, it shows sort of the year-over-year change or shift in where the benefits are perceived. And right at the top, you can see faster access to infrastructure is like the number one benefit. And then following on its heels is greater scalability, the fact that you can scale up and down when you need it, and that it's highly available, and that it's, faster time to market. So this is all to do with, reliability, scalability. It's available and it's fast. And if you look at the bottom of the list, you'll see cost savings, which is still significant. It's not first and foremost. It's all about speed to market. Organizations need to be agile these days, and with everybody getting access to these new technologies. These are disruptive technologies, and the people that are exploiting it and taking advantage of it get huge leaps in competitive advantage. So this is pushing a lot of the organizations down this path to spin things, create things, innovate more quickly by not having to worry about the traditional type computing. So that's the sort of the drivers that are happening behind this. If you dig into the kinds of cloud services by category, you can kind of see that collaboration, marketing, and development are very high on the list. Content sharing is there as well. But the interesting thing, and this is, again, Sky High's report material, they look a little deeper and they look at things where is the risk with these different kinds of tools? Because some cloud services are basically low risk because data or the ability to hack or compromise these solutions is low. But there's others that are very, very high risk services, and so they quantify them as to which services are being used and what level of risk are organizations allowing or are creeping into the organization. And so what we've seen, and I kind of started my presentation with this, is that over the past couple of years, there's been many brute force attacks on cloud environments. They're growing, considerably, and or organizations are scanning your environments, trying to figure out where you're vulnerable, and then they attack via vulnerabilities, be it through a partner organization or someone who might have access to you. And so these threats need to be mitigated. And so people are working on this, and this is getting better. And so the top 5 security threats that you need to be concerned with are, breach of payment card processing information. Well, the response to that is organizations are getting smart and they're hiring, security firms to come in and encrypt the data and put, security measures in place. Second one is data loss due to malicious hackers. Well, the response to that is making sure that you've got your records backed up and that there's a process that's automated that backs up that information. Accounts or services are being compromised. Well, the response is to provide detection software that can monitor, find, and alert when these compromises happen so that you minimize your exposure. Fourth one is loss of intellectual property or state-sponsored attacks where other countries or organizations are trying to infiltrate or steal secrets. Well, there's new committees being started up to investigate technology solutions to look at these particular problem areas. And then denial of service, DDoS attacks, so purchasing tools to protect your customer-facing sites is a response to that. So, this is stepping up. It's getting more awareness. People are responding to it. So it's not like we're not figuring it out. It is being managed. It is being dealt with. The types of sensitive data that need to be governed or managed or thought of how you're going to deal with this are, personal information, whether that be salaries, passport information, social insurance or social security numbers, payment data, credit cards, account numbers, infrastructure-related data, spreadsheets is a big concern. Passwords or people not renaming or protecting their passwords. And then just sensitive data, things on Outlook files or mail files or draft announcements or source code or files that are not encrypted. They're, sitting in open files. So this is the kind of data that needs to be protected, and policies to govern that information need to be put in place and controls to protect it. Another issue or concern with managing in the cloud that you need to think about from a service management point of view is vendor lock-in. And as you go higher up the scale, from infrastructure to platform to software as a service, the greater the risk of being locked into a particular vendor solution, which in some cases okay, but in other cases, the vendors are changing all the time. What happens if a vendor goes out of business or if a better solution comes along, if you're locked in, then it's difficult to get your data back out. So that's something to be concerned as well when you're putting your strategies together. And then other general challenges are, data ownership. Where is the data? In Canada, where we are, they're concerned about whether the data is actually on Canadian soil, because if it's not on Canadian soil, then it could be called upon through other laws in other organizations or other countries that could access that data. Network connectivity issues, migration and synchronization, and lack of standardization. These are other issues that have been raised that are challenges that need to be addressed in service management. So if you kind of boil this down and say, what are those specific challenges and where are they in top of mind point of view in different organizations, the interesting thing is that security, which was the top challenge, is dropping down on the list. It's not as important. People are figuring it out, but what the number one issue right now is lack of resources and expertise. There's not enough people that understand all of the implications of cloud and how to manage it, and that's the opportunity for IT service management, is to get up to speed and to fill that gap. Other challenges are compliance with laws around privacy and regulations that are issued by government agencies and organizations. And then getting into, how do you manage multiple cloud service providers? Cloud providers are like outsourced companies, and they need, relationships, they need contracts, they need measurements. Those things need to be put in place. Managing cost, although there is a strong belief that there is the ability to reduce costs, what they found, on the contrary, is that if you don't pay attention to the costs, often you may have environments that you spun up that are still sitting there that you were paying for. You didn't spin them back down, or you did not release, and they were not automated, and so you have to pay attention to some of those costs that are in place. Complexity of building the private clouds, it's still a little complicated for building them on site or building them to certain specifications. Governance, control, and performance are other challenges. So this is sort of the list of what's top of mind right now that needs to be addressed. So with that in mind, how are people tackling this? Well, there are some new standards that are coming into play and reference models. Here's one that is put together. This is by the NIST organization, and this is called the Cloud Computing Reference Architecture. Essentially, they've broken it down into that there's different roles that are being provided here. You've got cloud consumers. Those are the people that get the business benefit from the usage of cloud, and so they often are the business or the organization that is acquiring and consuming the cloud services. But there's new areas like cloud auditors, parties that independently can assess, how the vulnerabilities or the performance or the operations and the security of your cloud, implementations. Then obviously you've got cloud providers. These are the organizations that are responsible for providing these services to the consumers. And then there's a new entity called cloud brokers, and these are new services and or organizations that can, on your behalf, manage, negotiate, and control the relationships between the cloud providers and consumers, and by enforcing policies in order to make sure that your data and or standards or compliance requirements are being met. And then obviously you've got cloud carriers, and these are intermediary resources that provide the connectivity between the cloud providers and the consumers. So each of these groups needs certain roles and or expertise applied. And here's a diagram that shows sort of the interactions between these actors within the cloud computing model. So you've got top left-hand corner, cloud consumer is acquiring services from the provider, and the broker is managing that relationship and making sure that things are done within your parameters. And then cloud brokers are the independent auditor that looks at the soundness of how things are being provided, and then the cloud carrier that enables the actual workings and transactions of this. So that leads us to what's different about service management or IT service management. Well, this is putting a lot of pressure on getting better at managing three specific layers of capability. The first is providing better business support to the cloud consumers in helping manage the customer in terms of expectations and contracts and catalogs and inventorying, what they're currently using, and making sure that there are good accounting and billing mechanisms, and that you can report and audit on the things that are being used and how things are being purchased and what the pricing is and whether they're good rate structures. So this is on the customer or business-facing side that IT service management can play a strong role in helping that. In the center layer, there's the provisioning and configuration, and this is helping provide rapid provisioning, dealing with changes in the resourcing, monitoring and reporting on the actual health of the services, vis-a-vis metering and service level management. And this is where the broker services often come into play, and monitoring this through automation tools. And then finally, on the right-hand side, having the ability to port or interoperate information to and from different services, so having data portability so that you can copy to and from, be it bulk transfers or have a unified management interface, because there could be many brokers, there could be many different services, and each one obviously has their own management interface, but you need orchestration and layers that sit on top of that in order to make it easier to manage the provision of services, and then being able to spin up and down images and or manage the migration of services across different vendors, or bring them up or down as required. So brokers provide the tools to help manage that, and all of these areas need care, attention, and feeding. And this is where there's a great opportunity for IT to lead in this particular area and get better at these functions and capabilities. How they're doing that is they're incorporating some new concepts which you're probably familiar with. You're probably hearing a lot about DevOps and or Agile or Lean. These are new methods that are being deployed. Some of them maybe you could just say are not even new, but they're repackaged. The concept of DevOps is taking the development teams and adding them to the operations teams and making one group, calling it DevOps, so that the whole deployment and development of new capability into the operational environment is quick, painless, and seamless, and happens on a very rapid basis. And they're doing that by using agile development concepts and lean IT management principles and thinking to enable that, and parceled with some better tools to help orchestrate everything from managing code to configuring and deploying systems on a very rapid basis. So this is a whole new area that you'll hear a lot about in the next while. Strongly suggest that you get up to speed on DevOps. It's not, in a lot of cases, it's not new methods. It's just applying them differently. And there's huge growth in this particular area and adoption. 74% of organizations, according to some of these studies, are now utilizing a DevOps thinking or mentality, and some new configuration capabilities such as Docker are spreading like wildfire as well to help manage these areas. Governance is important. Organizations that have put governance and policies in place, what they've done is they've sort of quantified and denied high-risk applications so that it's blocked programmatically or through brokers or tools so that users can't use high-risk applications. In some cases, they permitted some moderately risk-based cloud organizations by allowing employees to download the data shared by other outside organizations, but they limit what can be uploaded into the cloud. And this has given sort of a partial permitted capability through governance, and then obviously sanctioning and allowing certain types of applications to be approved, that there's no problem with them because they're secured. And as a result of doing this, there is strong evidence that as soon as you start implementing cloud governance policies and the brokerage tools to be able to manage it, there's a significant drop in the high risk and medium risk applications. And so the whole risk profile drops, and this is where you're seeing through policy management and governance that the security aspect of cloud computing is getting much better on a day-to-day basis. So you're going to hear less, I believe, stories about attacks and things. It won't be as common. So why do you need to get ready now? This cloud computing is on fire. It's happening whether you get involved or not. If you don't get involved, then there's high risk to the organization because the business is going to go ahead and acquire these services. They already are. But when the business units were surveyed and asked, based on Right Scale survey that they did recently, and asked, what role should IT play, the business, wants IT to take a centralized role here and help provide things like advice on, which apps should go in the cloud versus not go in the cloud, or help select, what is private cloud, help them select policies, building the cloud, finding brokers and help put broker services in place, and selecting cloud or public cloud services, and then helping provide the tools to deploy clouds and offer, better insight and services on how to pay for cloud and making sure that you're getting your value for money. So organizations, the businesses want IT to help provide these services. They're asking for it. They need it. They want you to help out. So you need to get involved now. And when we look at the challenges by the maturity of the different groups, and this relates back to the first question I asked you, are you a beginner, explorer, or focused? Here are the top 5 challenges by each of those different maturity groups. And what's very interesting is that the number one challenge across all groups is there's not enough people with expertise that can help manage this right now. So you need to get up to speed quickly and understand this whole new way of doing computing. And you'll see security for the beginners is still top of mind. Comparatively to cloud explorers and focused, you see the security's dropped considerably down lower. Once they become more educated and focused on it, the security risk significantly drops to a lower challenge. And you can see compliance is still up there. Managing the cloud, multiple vendors is tough as well, because now you've got a number of relationships that are being managed, and how do you measure them and put the right service level agreements in place. So the whole ability to manage service level agreements and cataloging and measurements is extremely important to get good and more up to speed on. So how can you, as a service manager, get better at this? Well, guess what? There's some great certifications that are now available and training that is available to you. An organization called the Cloud Credential Council, CCC, is a new organization that has a certification path that they've developed, and you can look them up. Their website is at the bottom of this slide, and by the way, these slides are available for you to download after this session. But they have an introductory level that starts with what they refer to as Cloud Technology Associate, and this gives you a broad understanding of all the implication aspects of cloud. So it talks about everything about what is it, where does it come from, how do you administer it, how do you use it from a developer perspective, what are the security issues, the service manager and architectural aspects. And so it gives you a good broad understanding. And then there's deep dive professional accreditation that you can get by role, whether it be administrative, role, or you're a developer, or you're in security, or you are an IT service manager, or maybe you're a solution architect. So these are deep dive roles that you can get certification. Each of these classes is 3 days going through it, but you get certified in cloud computing. So it's really good to take a look at this and consider getting trained up on it. Here's an example of the Cloud Technology Associate 3-day course. Day one, you get introduction to the cloud business model. They talk a lot about virtualization and how they accomplish that. Day two, you get into different technologies and applications of the technologies. And then you get into cloud security, risk, and governance. And then day three, you start preparing for cloud adoption and cloud service management. So it gives you a good overview of getting ready for cloud. And then the cloud service manager, and this is the only other one that I included in here as an example, is a 3-day course as well. You get into the introduction, cloud fundamentals for service management, the different roles that are involved, service strategy, design, service management part 1, cloud part 2, and then economics, governance, and the value of cloud, and then popular service management frameworks, specifically ITIL and ISO and things of that nature. So it looks at their association with cloud service management. So this is just to give you an idea. These courses are out there. These are new standards that are being formulated. It's all backed by very large, mature organizations. Tips for you to get started. I think the number one thing is that if there's lack of resources, you need to look at getting some help. So we've included a starter kit in this presentation. There's a link to this, a web page. You can get access to these reports that I've referred to. So download the free stuff. There's cloud reports, blogs. At least that will give you insight that you can share with different people in your organization. Then strongly suggest that you register for training and get certified on this. And so I've put some links into some of those courses that you can get access to. And finally, if you're looking for access to other resources, consultative resources, that you can contact us and we can connect you with some folks that are in that area. Okay, that's my presentation. I'm going to switch now to Q&A, and I see I've got a couple questions come up here, so I'm going to just dial them up and see what we've got. How does the cloud computing reference architecture apply to SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS? Okay, the cloud reference architecture is an outline of who the consumers, providers, and brokers are. And in reference to these different models, infrastructure as a service, you still have a provider, who is provisioning the infrastructure. You still have a consumer. It may be the administrator, and IT is the consumer in that case. And you have brokers. So depending on which broker tools you use, they would monitor which infrastructures are in place or being used. So the model applies to that environment. Platform as a service is looking at middleware or databases or development environments that are running on top of those infrastructures. Same thing. You've got consumers, which would be the application developers. You've got providers, which would be the cloud providers of those areas. So the model works for that as well as right up to SaaS, software as a service, because the business consumer or users within the business using something like Microsoft Office. I mean, Microsoft is the provider. They're the business is the consumer. And then you've got brokers that are monitoring, how many licenses are deployed, and then providers, how you're getting access. So the model is generic that fits across all of those areas. So I hope that answers your question. Second question I've got here is, what is the IT service management gap to fill as opposed to the infrastructure operations management gap to fill? Interesting question. Well, one could look at it from IT service management could include both the management and governance at a higher layer as well as the infrastructure operations, or you could split them apart and do a deeper dive. And you could state that service management would focus more on the model that I referred to, making sure that there were good catalogs and pricing and structures in place, as well as the provisioning, as well as the broker, so they could provide more of a governance control layer and interface with an operations group. If you want to separate those two departments, in my mind, I see them together as one, service management, including DevOps as well. Okay, another couple questions come in. Does this align to the ITIL model for service management? Absolutely, yes, it does. In the training, the training follows to a certain degree the strategy, design, operational transition, and the management life cycle model as it goes through it. Okay, another question. Is it fair to ask providers to provide disaster recovery and business continuity testing within their offering? I think that is something that, yes, absolutely, you want to make sure that there is a method for that, and especially for business critical type applications that you intend to host in a cloud-based offering. Or it doesn't have to be software as a service, it could be middleware as well. And now, if we're talking about consumer services, your Twitter account, is it going to be disaster recovery? I'm assuming that it probably already is, or Facebook already has a tremendous amount of disaster recovery capability already in place. So I've never heard of anything significant happen, not to say that it couldn't, but certainly that is something that you want to ask your providers to offer. Another question, can DevOps replace traditional ITIL? I don't think it's going to replace traditional ITIL. I think traditional ITIL is going to expand to include more DevOps-based practices. It's just a refinement of doing a lot of the stuff that's already in ITIL. And yes, it does include CMDB. CMDB-like tools. The one that was referenced was Docker is somewhat like a CMDB tool, but it's more to do with configuring and tracking code and its configuration for deployments. ITIL still applies to cloud service management? Absolutely. I think cloud service management and ITIL is the basis for it. ITIL does not go away. ITIL is the foundation for managing cloud, and it's just now putting your head on slightly different to look at that this is like an outsourced model, so there's different elements within ITIL that you need to get better at, things like SLA management, provisioning, managing vendors, metrics, measurements, improvements, etc. I'm running out of time, so thank you for your questions. If you would be so kind and rate this presentation on what you thought of it and the content and the delivery, that's useful for me to think of new topics to speak of next month, and I hope you can join us next month in our Lean ITSM channel, as well as we have a new channel called DevOps Agile ITSM, and so you will hear some new subjects, and actually we have a presentation tomorrow being presented by Daniel Breston on DevOps, and it's tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on this same channel. I hope you can join us, and thanks so much, and look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you. Goodbye.